Music is kind of my favorite thing ever. Ever since I first had a favorite song, I don't think there's been a day that's gone by where I haven't listened to at least one song. I've wanted to make a video on music for a long time now, but I had no idea what it would be about. I just said it's my favorite thing ever, so where would I even start? But then I got this video recommended to me called The Mysterious Sounds of Infinity Frequencies by Chennington. The video is about an artist that I love that I'll save till the end to talk about, but I learned that these artists' songs are in a category similar to some other music genres that I enjoy. I love these genres not only because it's just good sounding music, but also because they are interesting beyond the sound, and they evoke certain vibes and feelings that can't be put into words, and can be put into certain aesthetics like in my previous video. These genres are called waves. Similar to how core aesthetics work, the music waves put a word relating to the aesthetic and then the word wave afterwards. Many of these kinds of genres take inspiration from the Y2K era, and especially the 80s and 90s, and also just seem to bring out a sense of nostalgia due to the types of mediums they appeared with. I'll go over 3 of these genres in this video, 2 very well-known ones, and then 1 I learned about in this video. I'll be talking about the history, art, sounds, and artists who create them. These are the most nostalgic types of music. Synthwave, like most online trends, really spiked in popularity in 2019 to 2020, but was first used in the 2000s. Synthwave mostly consists of electronic music and images reminiscent of old video games or other pieces of pop culture like movies, especially from the 80s. Visually, again, Synthwave takes ideas from the 80s with plenty of neon lights and colors, mostly pinks, purples, blues, and yellows. You'll see other 80s imagery like graphics and grids, hot rod cars, video game references such as pixel art and arcade machines, cassettes, smalls, and so on. You've almost definitely seen the iconic imaging of the setting sun that has been recreated more times to count. Because of the sunset imagery, palm trees have also become prevalent in these images. Some people have the vision of Synthwave as a carefree summer day spent on the boardwalk, at the beach, or at a video arcade like you've seen in movies that takes place in Miami or LA. On the other hand, some people's vision of the aesthetic are futuristic cityscapes. Although almost all of the visuals are taken from the 80s to 2000s, the themes of the future are always prevalent in the aesthetic. This gives it the vibe of a future that was never going to exist. Hence why you'll see big cyberpunk Neo-Tokyo-esque cities in these images, while keeping all of the outdated technology. It almost feels like this is what people from the 80s would have guessed the future would be like. More on the music side of things, Synthwave of course uses plenty of synthesizers and analog-style drum machine beats coupled with deep and powerful bass lines to create the dreamy retro feel. Going back to the vision of the Miami or LA beaches, artists like Miami Nights 1984 try to emulate that feeling. The Synthwave tracks feel like something you'd listen to while driving down Miami Beach at midnight. A lot of Synthwave songs are just instrumentals, but some other artists and bands try to bring Synthwave to life by adding their own vocals, such as The Midnight and Gunship. One incredibly popular artist that you've likely heard is Home, with the most popular song Resonance being a staple on the internet since first released in 2014. This lo-fi sounding beat has been remixed and changed so many times by fans because they found out no matter how you switch around the beat order, the song still sounds amazing. One of these popular remixes being This remix by Frank Jav C came out in 2017, and thanks to it and another artist who makes similar videos called Lucian Hughes, Simpsonwave is regarded as an actual subgenre of Vaporwave/Chillwave. Yes, a lot of Simpsonwave uses Vaporwave music, but I'm bringing it up now because of this specific song's use of Synthwave. Some people think it's supposed to be ironic, poking fun at putting these seemingly unrelated things together and calling it an aesthetic or genre, but the artists never make it feel that way. All of their Simpsonwave videos feel sincere, but the main point I see in why it feels sincere is these two seemingly unrelated things aren't really that unrelated. Synth and Vaporwave aim to give people nostalgia for the 80s and 90s, so pairing this artificial nostalgia with something that was actually around back then, that people are nostalgic for, just works so perfectly. Now, this video isn't about Simpsonwave, so I'm gonna move on now, but I highly recommend watching some of the linked videos if you want to know more about it. Synthwave has appeared in various media in the past decade as people have grown more nostalgic for the 80s. Video games like Hotline Miami uses everything we've talked about so far, and one of my personal favorite Call of Duty zombie maps, Zombies in Spaceland, uses Synthwave as it transports players back to the 1980s in an amusement park that's full of nostalgic Synthwave imagery and music. Also, back when I went to Universal's Halloween Horror Nights in 2019, I was pleased to find out that the theme was 80s and the park was full of Synthwave imagery, with the first scare zone being a video game-inspired 8-bit rave. Now, I wasn't around back then, but I love the 80s as much as Synthwave does. The music, the movies, the video games, the brands, aesthetics, culture, all of it. Synthwave is incredibly earnest with its love of everything 80s, and is made in tribute to the era rather than critiquing it. It wants to take people back to experience all the best parts of the era. Vaporwave, on the other hand, has a different tone. People can often get confused and group them as the same thing, but there are some key differences. To help you understand better, let's move on and talk about it. Vaporwave has a visual aesthetic similar to the Y2K era, but where Synthwave uses popular 80s imagery, Vaporwave is way more surreal in its use of nostalgia. It can use mundane aspects of human life, but twists them into this abstract idea of nostalgia and aesthetics. Examples can be music you'd hear in a mall or on TV. Take the subgenre weathercore, for example. It uses the nostalgia of old weather channels and creates Vaporwave versions of what you might hear while watching said channel. Or look at Office Wave, which takes one of the most mind-numbing aspects of society, the office setting, and creates surreal lo-fi music to go along with the mundanity. More so than Synthwave, it is debated whether Vaporwave is a criticism or parody of corporate aesthetics and capitalism, or a celebration of these aesthetics. I see it as both. Yes, it can be a cultural commentary on the rapid pace of technological advancement and the commodification of the past, but that shouldn't take away from the arts and mediums being used to make that commentary. It's an artistic and musical experience that morphs the mundanity of culture and consumerism and life itself. Vaporwave images take some elements from Synthwave but use them in different ways, such as the setting sun or the grid pattern. Many Vaporwave images use lighter colors compared to the bold and bright colors of Synthwave. These images give you the feeling that you're looking into another world. Pastel colors paint the ocean and sky, outdated hardware is still common, and consumerism is everywhere with flashy brand ads and logos. You'll see popular 90s anime being used, such as Sailor Moon and Neon Genesis Evangelion. Items such as cassettes, records, old cars, and old video game consoles like the NES and Dreamcast help bring you back to a time on the cusp of great technological advancement. Speaking of video games, one game frequently used in Vaporwave is the game Echo the Dolphin, which is why you might see dolphins in Vaporwave media. Along with these things, you may also see pieces of classical Greek architecture used in these images, such as statues and pillars. It's not exactly clear why Greek architecture has been heavily used in the aesthetic, but it could be due to a trend in the 90s where businesses and mansions would use Greek-style statues, pillars, or fountains as a shallow attempt to look more elegant or fancy. The release of the Macintosh Plus album called Floral Shop cemented the use by including a statue on the iconic album cover. Consumerism ran rampant in the 80s and 90s, so corporations and brands also fit this nostalgic feel with iconic advertisements such as Mac Tonight or the creation of Crystal Pepsi and New Coke. Malls are also a huge part of consumerism, and old 90s malls with neon lights and tile floors give an aesthetically pleasing look. Like mentioned earlier with the anime, another key difference between Vapor and Synthwave is the heavy use of Japanese culture in its music and art, most likely due to Japan being at the forefront of expansion at the time, experiencing an economic miracle and producing all kinds of technology that was shipped all across the world. This pastel dreamy Japanese idea bleeds into other genres like future funk that pair popular Japanese pop and funk songs with pastel neon Japan cityscapes and other images. The artist Taiko Inuki does a good job of blending the two genres together. The Future Funk wiki says it best. It takes the sampling aspect of Vaporwave, but rather than try to turn it into a decayed version of what it once was to mock the hollowness of capitalism at the time, it takes samples from 1970s and 1980s disco tracks and cuts them in ways to make a completely new and groovy track for the people to enjoy. By cutting the extra fluff and focusing on the part of pop songs most people tend to remember. Vaporwave music is usually very dreamy or relaxing to go along with all the soft colors of the aesthetic. The attempt to sound relaxing also helps to build on the mundane, corporate, and consumer world. Some Vaporwave songs use samples that are often pitched down or altered in some way. These samples are usually taken from pop or smooth jazz songs from the 80s and 90s, but some original artists have focused on a certain sound from Vaporwave, such as the artist Surfing, whose music sounds louder, distorted, and upbeat. While other artists like Windows 96 and Telepath have more liminal sounding pieces. And there are artists like 2814 and Namesh that have a more surreal and otherworldly take on the genre. I love the vibes Vaporwave gives off. Similar to Dreamcore, which I talked about in my previous video, it can be comforting and calm, or liminal and eerie, depending on the connection you have with a certain image or song. Vaporwave is able to celebrate, or mock, the flashy aesthetics of the 90s and Y2K, but either way, it's a beautiful art genre that takes you into a brighter world for a bit. While this genre can feel liminal at some times, the next and final genre aims to give you that feeling of liminality. And this genre is called Just like how Vaporwave is compared to Synthwave, Signalwave is a less upbeat subgenre that falls under Vaporwave. Signalwave is bleak, it's hollow, it's liminal. Also known as broken transmission, Signalwave music also incorporates samples of television commercials, radio jingles, and dialogue clips, and blends them with the typical Vaporwave sound but then chop them up in an erratic manner to evoke the impression of a disrupted transmission taking place. Signalwave can take you back to the late 90s or early 2000s when you'd be surfing channels on TV, sitting on the couch alone at night with staticky cuts and changing commercials. A lot of the songs are so fuzzy sounding that if there are vocals in them, it's hard to make out what's even being said, and that's the point. The goal of Signalwave isn't to make a catchy, pleasant-sounding song. It's to create these certain moods and feelings, whether be good or bad, by mashing all of these sounds together. It constantly keeps you on edge. It's supposed to feel like the device you're listening on is trying to reach out to you. Maybe it's trying to warn you, or maybe it's just desperately trying to communicate with you before it dies. Like I said in the introduction, Infinity Frequencies is an artist that I love who I first discovered when I became obsessed with liminal images and music. Infinity Frequencies has released 10 albums from 2013 to now, with the latest album coming out December of last year. The artist has an interesting relationship with Vaporwave, where when they first began making music, they only saw Vaporwave going in one direction. They saw many Vaporwave releases bringing happy nostalgia to life through funk and disco reworks, like I mentioned earlier in the video, but Infinity Frequencies wanted to create a new atmosphere surrounding the genre. They wanted to create something more meaningful that told a story. They also used Japanese samples in their work, such as those from old commercials and movies, but it works in their favor more with those who don't understand the language, so people might feel even more disconnected or alone when listening to it, which is a repeated theme in Signalwave, the feeling of being lost or alone. Infinity Frequencies is not the only Signalwave artist, but I just wanted to talk about them because of my own personal connection to their music. If you want to learn more about some other Signalwave artists, I recommend you watch Pad Chennington's video on the topic that I'll link down below. I also just recommend checking out his channel as a whole, as he makes great videos about all kinds of music genres, including Vaporwave. In Pad's Infinity Frequencies video, he talks about 3 of their earlier albums: Computer Death, Computer Decay, and Computer Afterlife. And those are all amazing and surreal albums in their own ways, but since he already covered them, I want to talk about my own favorite album, the 2022 album, Exit Simulation. Exit Simulation, like a lot of other Infinity Frequency albums, consists of looping remix samples with only 3 out of the 19 songs going above 2 minutes in length. Exit Simulation is such an eerie, monotonous, and lonely sounding album, and I'm saying that as a compliment because I'm pretty sure that's what the intended reaction was supposed to be. It starts off with a piece called The Labyrinth, which consists of a looping hum, that of a string instrument with the occasional whimsical chime. Although it's the first song, the title suggests that we are already lost in a maze of channels and sounds, all alone, trying to grasp onto whatever simulation of reality we have left. Although as we move on to awaiting the future, it's still eerie, but the sound feels less dreadful and more hopeful, as more whimsical instruments such as the harp bring us deeper into the simulation, in a sound that I can only describe as a whimsical opening to an old Hollywood movie. Procedural generated corridors sounds like what the title describes. Maybe it plays during a loading screen on an old computer game or something of the sort. The Void as a prototype has more of a raspy, haunting melody before moving on to alternate realities, which sounds more clearer than the others. It sounds like maybe you've escaped the simulation in another reality, but something's not quite right. I actually have a fond memory involving this song. If you've seen my last video, you'd know that last year I went on a cross-country road trip by myself, and one night while driving in the middle of nowhere, I decided to play this song on repeat. I was in the Midwest of America, so I was surrounded by fields, and the sun had just finished setting, so my headlights were illuminating the empty small road in front of me. In the distance was a radio tower that I could barely see the silhouette of in the new night sky. It had a light that would flash red every few seconds. I cannot describe the feeling I had while driving and listening to this droning, repeating track. It was anxiety-inducing yet calming. It didn't feel real. It felt like a simulation. Moving on, beyond the satellite array is a similar repeating track that just consists of 4 piano notes with static to complement it. Neural Interface and The First Night both sound like they could be from an old video game. And Anomaly almost sounds like something from the game Yuma Nikki. The namesake of the album, Exit Simulation, sounds particularly devious, like you're watching a villain in a movie crafting a sinister plan. Emerging technology almost sounds like a Japanese train station announcement chime. A Vanishing Figure is another mysterious and slightly sinister sounding track. The last track of the album is called Never Forget. The static on this track is at an all-time high, and once again, it almost has a hopeful sound to it. Like it's trying to say, no matter how lost you are in the labyrinth, never forget who you are. It's extremely impressive when music is able to capture you and transport you to a different world. I believe all of the artists and songs I've talked about in this video do a perfect job at achieving this task. The consumerism cliché is replicated through these visual and audio sample chops as so unique and interesting in music. I really hope you take the time to immerse yourself and get lost in the dreamy soundscapes I've presented to you today. These genres take you back and shed light on certain areas, showing all of its flaws. Whether you want to relive the best moments from the 80s, or want to walk around an endless consumerist mall from the 90s, or if you want to know what it's like for a CRT computer to slowly die. These are the most nostalgic types of music.